Wow, look at all the podium options we've got today. What a treat. Hi, everybody. You all right? You doing okay? You happy? You're living your best lives and all that? Well, a couple things. Before we get started, we're going to be in John 21 in a second, but before we get there, thanks for letting me invade your home and be a part of your family for the week. I know that when you build a tight community, it can be a little bit tricky to let people in, right? So thanks for doing that, letting me join you for meals and just be a part of your life. It's a great gift to be able to come and just see a little bit of what God's doing in your lives. And I've had great conversations with you. Thanks for all that. If you ever need me or there's ever a time in your life where you want to get a hold of me for any reason, I'm currently in Fullerton. I expect to be there for a little while. The church I serve at is called Fullerton Free Church. And if you need to get a hold of me, Dallas will know or Jen will know where to get a hold of me. It's not that, I'm not hard to find, but I'm always happy if you're coming through and you want to grab lunch, or if you just need to trade an email or a phone call or whatever. If I can be helpful to you, I'm available. So there's that. I'm going to leave right after the session today and try and beat LA traffic if I can manage. We'll see how that goes, but you never know. So this morning as we finish up, and remember the theme for the week is this idea of discipleship as movement, or the trajectory of discipleship. And so in some ways, as we're trying to think about what it looks like to finish strong, as you kind of come to the end of Joshua, we're really talking about finishing strong as a mindset that says nothing's done, right? So I've learned some things, I picked up some new tools, I got some new resources in my tool belt or whatever, but finishing strong, this is just a point on the movement from A to B. God's moving you in conforming to the image of Christ. And so there's a sense in which you want to do your best to finish strong in the things you committed yourself to do, but you also want to hold that loosely in recognition of the fact that there's lots more to come. And this is just one more place where God will meet you, but He'll meet you in new places in 6 months or in 5 weeks or whatever, So as we come to John 21, it's like a super famous text, whatever. But before we get there, I just want you to think about your most embarrassing moment, okay? And I'm not going to ask you to tell me what it is, but I'm going to tell you mine really quick, just so you have this in your head as we're going there. We all have these moments that are hard to live down, right? Things that something doesn't go your way, or you do something stupid that you wish you could take back, you regret it, you wish you could do it over again, but it's fixed in time and space. So I was telling some of you this morning that when I started high school, I went to high school shortly after my parents were divorced. My mom didn't have money for private school anymore, so I went to high school and I didn't really know anybody, public high school. And my guidance counselor said, hey, a great way to get to know people is get involved in clubs and organizations and whatever. I'm not sporty, as you can probably tell by looking at me, and so I was like, what are my options? I got into marching band right away. I got into theater pretty quick. I did art stuff, right? Ceramics classes and whatever. In the marching band, I play the piano, and so when I signed up for marching band, the marching band teacher was like, you can't carry a piano onto the field, that doesn't work, so would you be willing to be a drummer? And I was like, yeah, sure, because I could already read music, so it was not that big of a deal to join the drum line. So I joined the drum line as a freshman in high school. At my particular school in Phoenix, Arizona, the way they did it is freshmen played cymbals, sophomores played the bass drum, those big marching bass drums. The juniors played marching snares, and then the seniors had the option to either rotate kind of with whatever they wanted, but most of them played toms, quads or tris, whatever. So freshman year, I'm playing cymbals. That's my job. And I don't know how much you know about crash cymbals, but in order for this story to make sense, I have to just give you a little bit of quick education about crash cymbals. Crash cymbals are a big piece of metal that has a hole drilled in the center, and in order to hold on to them, they put a leather strap through the middle, and you tie a knot on the inside, like a double knot on the inside. You hold on to the leather strap. There are two ways to play a crash cymbal in a marching band, and you've heard them both, but maybe you never thought about it. One of them is just the traditional, right? And that happens in the Star Spangled Banner or whatever. And to do that, you hold the cymbals like this, vertically, and you smash them together kind of in a motion like that. The other way to play crash cymbals in a marching band, and this is the one a lot of people don't know, is as a hi-hat cymbal. And in order for that to work, you've probably all seen hi-hats before, but that's where there's a cymbal on the bottom and a cymbal on the top. And so in order for that to work in a marching band setting, you hold your cymbals like this, but then you have to march the routines on the field backwards, right? Because you have to face the snare drummer so that the snare drummers can play their snare drum and they can hit the cymbals back and forth like this. So that's the one that sounds like, right? You've heard those before. Okay, so those are the two ways you do it. if the music that you're playing in the marching band requires a hi-hat cymbal, you as a cymbal player have to learn all of the field routines backwards because you have to march them with your back to the crowd so that the snare drummers can hit the cymbals. That's all set up. You play the whole season. We played every football game. We traveled for competitions, whatever. At the end of the marching band season, they do this thing in Arizona called ASU Band Day. It's at Arizona State University in their massive stadium. All the marching bands from all over Arizona come. You play. You have the opportunity to play 3 songs in front of international judges who assess you, and then they give you a ranking. 3 is the lowest score. 2 is the second lowest. 1 is the best score you can get. Or they have the option, if you're exceptional, to give a marching band an A, which is above a 1. It's like the best possible score you can get. My marching band had a reputation for having only gotten A's, like in the history of my school. So it was like a big deal. We prep all season. We're standing on the sidelines, Arizona State University's football stadium. There's like, 10,000 people in the stands at the time, all marching band nerds, whatever, and their parents. And we're standing on sidelines waiting to go on the field. They give us the 90-second warning that we're about to take the field to play our 3 songs. And we're standing at parade rest waiting. And then kind of the unthinkable happens, right? My right-hand cymbal, that leather knot on the inside of that hole, it, for some reason, comes untied. And when it comes untied, the weight of the cymbal won't stay up. So it basically just slides off the strap. Does that make sense? It unties and the cymbal falls to the ground and crashes, making a loud noise. Now, you get judged for everything that happens at this assessment. So as soon as my cymbal falls, it makes this terrible noise. I can hear the upperclassmen, right? The juniors and the seniors, the guys with the tritoms and the snare drums behind me going, "You bleepity bleep, idiot freshman, you dumb kid, you're going to cost us this whole competition. We've been practicing all season. Like, this is the moment that counts, and now you can't keep your cymbal tied." Like, what, and they're just like cursing at me and yelling at me. So I panic, and I reach down to pick up my cymbal, and when I do, I hear a noise that's worse than the sound of my cymbal crashing. I hear the sound of my polyester band pants ripping. And when I say that my polyester band pants were ripping, I don't mean I got like a little tear. I mean I'm wearing these tight black polyester band pants, and they tore from the bottom of my zipper all the way to my back belt loop. So essentially what I have are 2 separate legs attached by a zipper. That's what I got, right? I'm wearing just like Hanes whitey-tighty underpants underneath, right? And the guys behind me are like, "Bro, we can see your drawers," and I could feel the breeze, so I understood. So then I'm trying to fix my cymbal. The drum majors blow the whistle that we're supposed to move to attention and get ready to march onto the field. I got nowhere to go. I retie the cymbal, that's ready to go, but I'm trying to cover up the back. There's nothing I can do, so I'm just like, well, I guess we're just gonna take the field, We take the field in our first formation. The drum major blows the whistle for the first song. And it's just then that I realized that the 3 songs that our band director had chosen for the adjudication were all songs that didn't require a crash cymbal, but they all required hi-hat, which means that my first 4 counts were 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I marched the whole rest of the competition with my butt facing 10,000 people at the stands at Arizona State University. Now, that was my freshman year, right? I will tell you, we did not get an A that year. It was the first time my school had ever not gotten an A. But when we went back on Monday to watch the video recording, and they have like a video of it, and then the judges like talking to microphones, it sounded just like this. The guys go, "Flute players, your pitch is impeccable. Sounds beautiful. So well done." We're watching things. And then somebody else would be like, "Yeah, I just want to say, trumpet players, love those high knees. Keep that up. So it's so important to keep your knees high, and you guys, you're in sync. It looks beautiful, incredible. Cymbal players, nice underpants." And I'm like, "No!" All my class got to hear it. It was on the tape. My friends would play that. All 4 years, that tape would come out. Every time we went to do a competition, people would be like, "Hey, what kind of underwear are you wearing?" I never was able to live it down. When you have a moment like that, where something awful happens, it's really hard to just press reset and start over, right? Imagine what it feels like then to be Peter. Jesus had said, "Hey, you're all going to fall away because of me." And he'd been like, "No, not me." And he'd been like, "No, you are going to deny me." He's like, I'd rather die, right? We looked at that last night. And then just like Jesus said, you could read this if you want in John chapter 18, just like Jesus said again and again and again when Peter is asked, "Hey, aren't you one of Jesus's people? Aren't you somebody who travels with him? Aren't you one of his disciples?" He denies it and denies it. and denies it with a curse, right? So Peter did exactly what he said he wouldn't do. He did exactly what Jesus said he would do. He denied the one that he, by his own admittance, had said was the Christ, the Son of the living God. So on one hand, I want you to see the breadth of this. In one guy, you've got a guy who both believes that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, but also denies him in a most crucial moment, right? And that's all going on inside of Peter. But reputationally, however bad it was for me to be the kid whose cymbals crashed and pants ripped at marching band day, like imagine what it feels like to be the one who betrays the Christ, denies the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter's got to live with that. And it's also worth noting that after his crucifixion, the disciples, it tells us in John 20, you can look at John 20 verse 9, that the disciples still didn't understand that Jesus would rise again. So understand that after the crucifixion, we all know the story, we just celebrated Easter, like we know how the thing goes. They didn't have that knowledge. The disciples were still not clear on the fact, even though Jesus had said it in no uncertain terms, they didn't understand that he was going to be rising from the dead. And so in Peter's mind, the last conversation that he had with him happened before he denied him. So Peter's thinking in his guts, like, I have to live with this forever. I did this thing that my master said I would do, and I denied and argued. I threw my buddies under the bus, and then they killed my master, and he's gone, right? He's in a hole in the ground somewhere across town. Peter's living with that. Jesus rises from the dead, and everything changes. Peter does have some quick interaction, right, after the resurrection. But remember, too, that prior to Jesus' death and resurrection, Jesus had said to his disciples, I will meet you in Galilee afterwards, right? And so here we get to 21, and John and the disciples have kind of gone back to what they know best. They've gone back to their home area, and John and the disciples are back out on a fishing boat. So hit John 21 with me, if you will. I love this section. It says, after this, John 21:1, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we will all go with you. And they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So they've gone back to fishing. They're at the Sea of Galilee. Makes sense. They go back to fishing, and it turns out they're still not any good at it. Because just like we read in the very first story we looked at, when Jesus first introduced himself to Peter, now here at the end of the story, they're back out on the water, and they're not catching any fish. So I don't know what that tells you about the kind of fisherman Peter was, but you could put the pieces together. And it says this in verse 4, that just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? You guys have probably all been in this spot where you're doing a thing and some other person wants to come along and like ask you questions about it, but you don't want to talk about what you're doing because you don't feel great about it, or whether like when you're sketching something and somebody's looking over your shoulder and like, is that supposed to be a tree or a person or an alien? And you're like, just get away from me, I'm trying to draw. Like here are the fishermen. And there's this dude on the shore, and they don't know who it is, and he's like, hey, how's the fishing going? But they haven't caught anything. So Jesus is initially a nuisance, right? He's asking them a question about their failure. He says, children, do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. And I imagine it sounded like that. No. Mind your own business. In verse 6, he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. And so they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, by the way, the disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, that's not just a dude on the shore. That's not just like a nosy passerby. He says, that is the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. I want you to remember your most embarrassing moment, and I want you to put yourself also for a second into that feeling of Peter having done exactly what he said he wouldn't do. Then he's in this boat, he's back in an old familiar place, he's running all the things that have happened through his mind. They don't catch any fish, and so he's like, I suck at this, whatever. He's feeling all of it. This dude on the shore says, have you caught anything? They say, no. He says, put it on the other side. They do, and then their nets fill up with fish. And John's like, that isn't just like a regular dude, like that's Jesus. I want you just for a second to try and think about how you'd feel. the light bulb comes on and you realize that it's Jesus on the shore, would you be, I don't know, I think there'd be a mixture of feelings, don't you? I think there'd be a mixture of like, this is crazy, he's alive and yet we know he was dead. He's meeting us just like he said he would. You'd feel some of that stuff, but you would also feel like, how am I going to ever look at this guy in the eye? How am I going to, I can't just go back to normal. Like I can't pretend like this didn't happen. Like I hadn't had the opportunity to make an apology. I haven't apologized to the other dudes. I haven't said to Jesus like I was an idiot. Jesus could be pissed off at me. It's not consistent with the character of Jesus, but he might be angry, right? All of that shame that I felt when my pants ripped and I had to march times 10, right? Because now the Messiah is on the shore and there's a conversation that needs to be had, but you have no idea. I will tell you that if all you read was what I just read, you might be tempted to assume, just knowing what human nature is like, that when John says to Peter, it is the Lord, and Peter realizes it's the Lord, and it says he throws on his jacket and he flings himself into the sea, you might be tempted, if that's all you heard, to believe that Peter had thrown himself into the sea on the opposite side of the boat and was swimming away from the shore out into the middle of the Sea of Galilee to get away from the situation. That would be a pretty typical response for many of us when it comes to dealing with shame and guilt and regret and embarrassment, right? That we try to move away from it. We try to go further away, but that is not what Peter does. And in fact, what we see is that he throws on his coat and he flings himself like chaotically into the sea in the direction of Jesus. And it might seem like I'm making a big deal out of nothing, but what that tells us and what we see in that is that he wasn't worried about another interaction with Jesus. He was actually excited and anxious, eager to have another interaction with him. He moves towards Jesus in this moment. He realizes it's the Lord and he throws himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat like normal people, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. Then things get really cool, okay, right? So check this out. Peter has moved towards Jesus. He's soaking wet. When they get out on land, they see a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you've just caught. Okay, check this. They get to the shore, and Jesus already has built a fire, and he's making breakfast. So let's just press pause on the whole story for a second and think about this. Number one, fish for breakfast. Gross, right? That's disgusting. But if Jesus is cooking fish, it's probably pretty good, right? Aren't you at least a little bit interested in what Jesus's breakfast skills are like? I am. I imagine that fish is probably pretty excellent, right? They get to the shore, and Jesus, the creator of the universe, the Messiah, right? The one that their great-great-grandparents had been waiting for, died and rose again, is what? He's leaning over a fire and he's cooking some fish for them. He's making breakfast for them. And he says to them, oh, hey, your boat's full of fish, right? Yeah, bring some of that and add it to the fire. Now, there's an interesting thing going on here, and I don't want you to miss it. And you'd be tempted to race past it. In fact, when I told you that we were going to study John 21, you're probably assuming we were just going to get straight to that part where he goes, do you love me? And Peter says, yes. And he goes, do you love me? And they kind of go back and forth 3 times. I promise we'll get there in a second. But don't rush to that. I want you to stop and think about what it means that the Creator is making breakfast for these guys. It's just an act of generosity. It's just a simple kindness. It's just a beautiful gesture of service and nourishment, right? But then what makes it even weirder is he says to them, bring some of the fish you caught and add it to the fire. So here, let's ask this question. Where did he get the fish he's already got? Where did he get them? He wasn't fishing. Well, it doesn't really matter, right? If you believe Jesus is God, then you can just sort of suspend your disbelief for a second. I mean, isn't it possible? We don't really know, but Jesus, it doesn't tell us, but I suppose it's possible that while they were out fishing, Jesus walked down to the edge of the shore with his skillet, and he was like, hey, fish. And they're like, yes, Jesus. And he's like, I want to cook some of you for my friends. And they're like, pick me. And he's like, okay. And they jump into his skillet, and then he goes and cooks them, right? He's Jesus, so it's entirely possible that was the interaction that happened. Or it's possible that Jesus just went, I need fish, and they were there, right? Maybe Jesus waded out into the water when they weren't paying attention and grabbed a couple. I have no idea. My point is, Jesus wanted to cook fish, and he had access to as much fish as he wanted. Okay, so think about that. Jesus didn't need their fish. He had already procured some fish. He's cooking the fish he'd already procured. I would say it's easily arguable that he could have procured as much as he wanted. If he walked down to the shore and had a conversation with the trout, or if he caught them with his hands, or if he just willed them into existence, however he did it, if he wanted to cook 15 fish, he could have had 15 fish. But apparently he's cooking 7, and he wants 7 more. Why is this happening, right? Why is he including them in the breakfast? He doesn't need their fish. So why does he invite them to add their fish to the fire? There is a picture of the Christian life and of discipleship that is painted around this fire that people rush past. And here's what it is. Jesus didn't need their help. He didn't need their fish. He could have had all the fish he wanted on his own. But what he chooses to do is to include them. To include them in the preparation of this breakfast. To include the resources that they bring. Not because he needed their help, but because he wanted them to experience and to enjoy what it feels like to cook something with Jesus, right? To participate in what God is already cooking, right? He gives them the opportunity to participate in what he's already cooking, not because he needs them, but for their good, right? For their good. You guys, that is ambassadorship entirely. That's the Christian life. That is discipleship in a nutshell. God doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. He's never needed us. He could do everything he wants to do without ever utilizing any human being. And yet, Jesus says, I'm appointing you to be my ambassadors. Why? Not because he needs us, not because that's the only way to share the gospel with the world, but because he wants us to experience the joy of participating in what he is already cooking. Right? That's the Great Commission. It's not that you're necessary to breakfast, but he includes you. Let me give you just one more thing to think about. All of the fish they bring, they only have because he filled up their net. They had fished all night and caught nothing. So had they just been in their own strength and in their own fishing prowess, had they just done it by their own power, when they got to the shore, Jesus would have said, hey, bring some of the fish you caught and add them to the fire, and they would have had to be like, we don't have any fish, right? But because Jesus has filled their nets, they have the opportunity to participate. That's what spiritual gifts are. That's what talents are. That's your experience. That's your knowledge. That's your wisdom. Everything you have, God put in your net first. And apart from God, you wouldn't have anything in your net. Your net would be empty. You'd bring nothing to the table of value. You have things to bring to the breakfast because he put them in your boat. And then after putting them in your boat, he says, bring them over here and cook them with me. Not because he needs you, not because he couldn't have had all the fish he wanted, but because he wants you and I to experience the joy of taking the things he gave us first and utilizing them in participation with him in the breakfast he's already working up. That is the Christian life, writ large, right? It's beautiful. Jesus says, bring some of your fish and add them to the fire. And that's what they do. They come and they put it together. It says, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you've caught. Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. And now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. I'll just point out here briefly that Jesus said to them prior to his death, every time you eat bread and drink wine, I want you to remember my body that's given for you, and I want you to remember my blood that's been shed on your behalf. Here we have Jesus, in essence, there's no wine, it's breakfast. I mean, come on. But he is essentially breaking bread for them for the first time after his resurrection. When Jesus sat down with them the first time and he broke the bread and he passed it out to them and he said, this bread is my body that's being given for you. Eat it in remembrance of me. They didn't know what he was talking about. It was like a weird ritual. He'd kind of taken some of their Passover tradition and incorporated it, but it wasn't what they were used to, and they did not have a framework to understand fully what he was talking about. I guarantee you that every one of them this time, when he breaks the bread and he takes a little bit of fish and he hands it to them, the moment that the bread is broken, all they can see is the cross. Because they get it now. They get it. This would have been a whole different kind of breakfast. I doubt there was a dry eye, right? He serves them breakfast. He breaks bread. And I don't know if he's like looking at them over the bread as he breaks it. He's like, you guys see what I'm talking about here, you know? And he gives them this breakfast. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Verse 14. Then, 15, we get to the famous part, right? When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? It's a weird question until you remember that he had literally said that he was more faithful than everybody else, right? So he's the one who said, I don't know about these knuckleheads, but I'm not going to betray you. So Jesus is like, was that true? Is that right? You love me more than all these guys? Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my sheep. Part of what Jesus, much has been made of this text, by the way, and if you go back to the original language, I get that the words for love change, and you'll hear whole sermon series taught on the way these words shift and whatever. I think sometimes we make this a lot more complicated than it actually is. Peter had betrayed him. Peter had denied him 3 times, just like Jesus said he would do. I think Jesus repeats this question 3 times, and that is significant, but I think he's also trying to help Peter remember something important. We're going to get there in just a second. But he says to him, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I do. And he says, feed my sheep. So part of what Jesus is doing too is saying, like, your betrayal doesn't change anything about my expectation. Your failure has not at all disqualified you from being my ambassador, right? You are still the guy, like even just a couple nights before this, at the last half of John 20, when they're in the upper room, right? On the night of the resurrection, you'd expecting like all the disciples to be throwing a party. They don't throw a party on Resurrection Sunday, by the way. They hunker down in a little room scared with locked doors because they don't know what's going to happen. And Jesus busts into the locked room. He doesn't break the door down. He just appears. And he says, peace. He says, shalom to them. Like, what are you guys doing here, hunkered down in this room all together? Bunch of people who look the same and think the same, have the same ideas. Like, you got to get out of this room, he says to them in John 20. Because everywhere you go, forgiveness will go with you. But if you stay in this room, forgiveness goes nowhere, he says in John 20. Right? Now he's looking at Peter specifically and he's saying, do you love me? And Peter says, yes. And he's like, then it's like, the deal's not off. Right? Like, my expectation for you is the same. When I asked you to be my ambassador, I knew you were broken. You've proved it now, but I'm not surprised, and it doesn't change anything, right? Do you love me? Peter says, yes. He says, feed my lambs. Second time, he says, son of John, do you love me? He says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. The third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Verse 17. And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? Peter's like aching in his heart because he just keeps asking him the same stupid question. Do you love me? And Peter said to him, Lord, you know everything. Let's just stop there for a second. I think that recognition is what Jesus was aiming at in the whole interaction. I think that what Jesus wanted Peter to remember, and maybe what Peter had forgotten, is that Jesus knew everything when he met Peter, and he knows everything when he said, you're going to deny me 3 times, and Peter argued, and he still knows everything. And what that means is that Jesus is aware that Peter is not a person who's lost his love for Jesus. Peter's not a person who's lost his passion for this mission. Peter's not a person who has ceased to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. None of those things have happened. Did Peter do something stupid? Yeah. Did he do something cowardly? Yes. Did he prove that he's a fallen, broken individual? Yes. Did he break his promise to Jesus that he would never deny him? Yeah, he did. He did all that stuff. But has the essential heart and faith of Peter changed? No. The essential heart and faith of Peter is the same. He's just proven that he's a sinner. And Jesus knew he was a sinner at the start when he stepped into the boat with him. He knew along the way that he was broken. And he knows it now. When Peter finally snaps and he's like, I don't know why you keep asking me the same question. You know everything. It's almost like Jesus goes, right. I know everything. I know everything. I know what's going on in you. Feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. And quit worrying about what you think I think. I know the truth about you. It's interesting, at the beginning of John, I think maybe it's in John 4, it says that Jesus didn't need man's testimony about a man because he knew it was in a man's heart. Right? Like Jesus didn't ever collect business cards. That's the way to read that. There was never a time where somebody had to come up and be like, oh, I'm Darin. I was in a Christian rock band, and then I worked at the Joshua Wilderness Institute, and then he's like, yeah. I know everything. I don't need you to tell me about yourself, and I definitely don't need you to wear a mask or posture because I know you. Peter says, Lord, you know everything, right? You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I think what Jesus was aiming at the whole time was helping him to remember that God knows the truth of what's going on in him. Because I think sometimes we ourselves forget that God knows that about us. We're worried that God believes some things about us that aren't true. Or we're worried that maybe what our peers say about us or what the culture says about us. Or sometimes when we look into the mirror and we're tempted to just replay the highlight reel of all our failures over and over again, we feel like that's the way God thinks about us. And if Jesus was standing in the room in the flesh, he would want to look at you and be like, you know I know everything, right? I know you. I know you. Yeah, so you blew it. So you're dumb. So you did something stupid. Welcome to being a human. But I know you. You don't get to define yourself. The world doesn't get to define you. The cruelty of your teachers or your parents or your peer group or whatever, those people don't get to define you. This is a story I've told a lot, so forgive me if you heard it before, but it captures this idea really well. I took my kids to Legoland, right, when they were little, and I told them they could all get like a souvenir, one souvenir. You know, just pick something and you can get it. So it's a little toy or a t-shirt or a hat or whatever. And most of my kids were fine, like they picked things that were really easy, but my son Hank, who's kind of always had his own way of looking at the world, he says, Dad, the only thing I want is a finger necklace. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And he goes, you know, Dad, I just want a Legoland finger necklace. And I was like, all right, we can look for it. So then we're looking at the little shops, you know, we're going to all the little kiosks, the little stands, nothing. All day long we're looking. It's the only thing he wants. I'm like, Hank, are you sure you don't want something else? No, I just want a finger necklace. I'm like, all right. So we keep looking. Finally, towards the end of the day, I actually asked like a clerk in one of the gift shops, I'm like, do you guys sell Legoland finger necklaces? And the guy's like, I don't know what that is. And I was like, me neither, but my kid's dumb and that's what he wants, so, you know. And the guy's like, you could check at the big shop on the way out. Like maybe they have that at the exit. That's like the store that sells everything. And I was like, okay. So end of the day, like Legoland's closing. We go to the big shop. And we're looking around. I'm like, Hank, if you don't pick something else, dude, you're not going to get a toy. You're not going to get a souvenir. Like this is the end of it. And he goes, oh, let me look one more time. So we're looking all around the store. And then all of a sudden from across the room, I hear his little voice and he goes like, Dad, I found it. And I'm like, what? So I go over to where he is, and he's standing in front of this one wall that just is all the same thing. It's like a display that has all the same thing on it. And he looks at me like this, and then he looks at the wall, and he goes, finger necklaces. And I walked over to the wall, and I pulled one of these things off the wall, and I was like, you mean keychains? Because that's what the wall was full of, keychains. And he took it out of my hand, and he put it on his finger, and he goes, finger necklaces! And I'm like, you are a stupid kid, right? And as I thought about it, I thought like the audacity, had he said at the beginning of the day, like, I just want a keychain, we could have done that in 4 seconds, right? But because he called it something that it isn't, it was impossible to identify. And I spent the whole day looking like a dork, hunting for a thing that was everywhere, literally, right? Now the point of the story is this. That thing that you put your keys on, it has a name. I don't know who invented the keychain. I should look that up. But somewhere along the line, after keys were invented, somebody was like, we need a place to keep these. Let's put them on a ring. And the keychain came to be, right? And it's called a certain thing. It's called a keychain. Nobody gets to just start calling it something else. You don't get to just start calling it a finger necklace. That's a crazy way to live, right? And yet so often, God looks at us and he calls us ambassador. He calls us his daughters and his sons. He calls us his brother. He calls us his children. He calls us good. He calls us lovable. He calls us worthy. He calls us blessed. Right? Jesus calls us these things, but that's not what you're calling yourself. In the privacy of your own life, in the darkness of your own mind, as you listen to the voices swimming around you of popular culture or the things that the jerk said to you in high school or whatever else, you have all of these other people who are calling you something, and you start to call yourself that as well. And it's easy to forget that you are what Jesus calls you. And what Jesus calls you doesn't change even when you do something stupid. even when you argue with him about whether or not you will deny him, and then you go on to deny him, what he calls you is the same. He says, I told you earlier in the week that Jesus or God never asks a question that he doesn't already know the answer to, right? That for Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, that wasn't about God learning something about Abraham's faith. It was about Abraham and Isaac learning something about Abraham's faith. When Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? He's not asking because he doesn't already know. And what he wants Peter to remember is that Jesus already sees him and knows him. You know I do, is what he's meant to get. In spite of our failures, denials, weaknesses, God knows our hearts. And he wants Peter to remember that. Jesus says, feed my sheep. And then the last little section I want you to look at, and I'll be done. What time am I supposed to be done? Am I close? Good? Doesn't matter. Okay. He says in 17 at the end, feed my sheep. He says it for the third time, essentially. And then in 18 he says this, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. And this he said to show what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. It's a very interesting thing. It feels a little bit like a non sequitur. Like it feels like they're talking about one thing, and then all of a sudden Jesus starts to talk about something else. But I want you to see they're connected, right? I want you to see that they're connected. Jesus says to him, when you were young, you got up in the morning, and you put on the clothes you wanted to wear, and you went where you wanted to go. But when you're old, that will change. And there's a day coming where somebody else is going to dress you, and you're going to have to just hold out your hand because either your eyesight has failed or your legs don't work as good or whatever else. But in old age, you're going to have to hold out your hand, and somebody else is going to lead you to a place that you didn't ask to go. And he tells him this to indicate the kind of death he's going to have. But what I would love to suggest to you is that he's not just speaking in a literal sense. He's not just talking about Peter becoming an old man and not being able to put on his own cloak. There's cloak again. Where's Faith? Did she leave? I haven't seen her. She left? She went home? She what?
She's at a doctor's appointment.
Oh, she's okay.
She's good.
All of a sudden, I was just going to make a cloak joke, and then she was gone. And it was like, I don't want to make a cloak joke if she's not here. Like, that's just mean then. Tell her I said bye. Okay. Sorry, I got distracted. I just thought I had not seen her in 2 days. Did she die and we don't know? What's going on? Okay, we're fine. What was I going to say? Yes. He says, when you're young, you get dressed, you go where you're going to go. When you're old, somebody will dress you. He's not just talking about Peter's physical death. What Jesus describes in that particular description is the trajectory of all discipleship. If we're talking about discipleship as movement, here's what I want to say to you. When you're young, as a follower of Jesus, it feels like you chose a thing, and you're going to go where you want to go. You're going to come to the Joshua Wilderness Institute. You're going to go to Turkey. You're going to wear your WWJD bracelet or HPI bracelet or whatever. You're going to put on what you want to wear, and you're going to do your thing your way. But there is a trajectory of discipleship. There is a trajectory. There's a movement, and the movement is towards less autonomy and less decision-making and more submission to the Spirit of God. So when you're young, you feel like you're calling the shots and you're deciding when and where, what career, who you're going to marry, where you're going to go, what it's going to be like. You feel like you're doing all of that. And in some ways, you kind of are. But as you mature and grow, what I want you to know is that it's a great idea to turn all of that loose. And that as we grow, and I'm talking to myself, right? So I'm not done with this. But increasingly, it becomes less important to put on what you want to wear and go where you want to go. And it becomes more sort of the pace and the purpose of your life to let God dress you and to hold out your hand and to let God decide where you're going to go and when, right? I will say that and Dallas knows this, but my job in Fullerton has only been hard for 8 years. I talked about that a little bit in the grill, right? It's only been hard for 8 years. That's not fun. I would many days like to do something else. But in my followership of Jesus and in the trajectory of discipleship as movement, right? I'm no longer in a place in my life where I feel like it's important for me to decide where to go or what to wear or what to say. I feel fairly content most days. I don't want to make this seem cooler than it is because it's not consistent, right? But on my best days, I'm happy to be where God wants me to be, and to say what God wants me to say, and to just sort of hold out my hand and let Him lead me where He wants me to go. That's not just the trajectory of like a young person to an old person. It's the trajectory of a young disciple to a mature disciple. He says this to Peter to say something to him of his death, but also to illustrate to him that he wants Peter to go on this journey with him. And he wants you guys to go on that journey as well. I'll finish with one last thing. John 3:16, right? Most famous verse in the Bible. Says that God loves the world so much that He gave His only Son, that anybody who believes in Him won't perish, but instead will have eternal life. You guys know that verse. If you don't, you're fired from Joshua, right? So you haven't kicked anybody out. But if you're sitting here and you're like, what? You got to go, right? That's it. You're not going to Turkey. You're a bad Joshua student. When we think about John 3:16, we mostly think of it in terms of conversion and salvation. We think of it in terms of God loved the world, sent Jesus, and anybody who believes in Him. That anybody who believes in Him, we most often, when we're thinking of that verse, we're most often taking it to mean believes in the tenets of, like penal substitutionary atonement. Or basically, we're taking it to mean like, do you believe that Jesus is God? Do you believe that He rose from the dead? That He took the sin of the world upon Himself? Like we sort of make that believe in Jesus mean a couple of like theological bullet points that like Wayne Grudem handed to us or whatever. But can I suggest to you that when John is writing John 3, he isn't thinking about like the 4 spiritual laws or evangelism explosion, or he's not thinking like, here are the key components you need to believe in order to call yourself a Christian or to go to heaven. I actually don't think he's thinking specifically about that at all. When he says believe in Jesus, he's talking about the whole of who Jesus is. So yes, do you believe that He's God? Yes, that's part of this. Do you believe that He rose from the dead? Yes. Do you believe that He's part of the Trinity? Yes. All that stuff is contained. But what is also contained in John 3:16 is, do you believe He loves you? Do you believe that you are worth the incarnation? Do you believe that even with all of your flaws and all of your mistakes and all the secret things in your life that you hope nobody ever finds out, do you believe that He loves you still? Believing in Jesus isn't just believing that He did some things 2,000 years ago that you're the beneficiary of. It's believing that you are enough right now because He says you are. That you're usable and valuable and worthy to be used by God today and tomorrow and in 10 years. That's believing in Jesus. Why? Because He said, you will be my ambassadors. He said in John 20, hey, where you go, forgiveness will go with you. And if you choose to just stay hunkered down, forgiveness ain't going, right? We are the method He chose to reach the world. And I think sometimes in the darkness of our own minds, we think like, I'm not good enough, or I've made too many mistakes, or I've said too many stupid things. Or sometimes on the other days, maybe in the brightness of our own lives, we think like, I'm the best, and nobody's better at this than me, and God is really lucky to have me, And all of that is the wrong place to have your attention focused. Jesus says again and again in this text, follow me. What's He asking us to do? He's asking us to follow Him. That's what it comes down to. And in order to follow Him, you have to believe Him, not just believe in Him, but you have to believe Him when He says, you are His pick, right? You are His pick. I will be praying for all of you as you travel to Turkey and as you finish up your Joshua year, and then as you move on to the next stage of whatever God will use to refine you in the next chapter. I already said I'm at your beck and call should you need me for anything down the road, and they can help you connect with me. But man, in order to finish Joshua strong, you really do just have to recognize like this is just one plot point on a long line towards a place of maturity where like you just hold out your hand and God takes you where He wants you to go. I'm going to invite the worship team back up to lead us, and I'm going to pray as I close. God, thank you so much that you call us good, that you are cooking a breakfast, that you give us fish to include. God, I thank you for the ways in which that you see us and you invite us in, and you transform us over time. Help us to believe not just in what you did in the cross and in the tomb, but help us to believe in what you've said about our world and about us individually and about our future and about the trajectory of discipleship, would we, God, believe in you, that we wouldn't perish, but instead would have eternal life. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.